The morning of the ceremony, Luna Adiz ironed her only decent dress with hands that would not stop shaking. She had been ironing the same sleeve for 4 minutes. The iron hissed. The sleeve was already flat. She kept going anyway because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering why she was here instead of her sister, and she could not afford that yet. Her name was not on the official guest list. It was not on the ceremony program. It was not on the seating chart that the palace staff had arranged with such precise, deliberate care. Nadia's name was on all of those things. Nadia, her older sister. Nadia, who had packed a bag at 2 in the morning 3 days ago and walked out of their mother's house without leaving a note. Nadia, who had called Luna from a bus station 6 hours later and said, in a voice that carried no guilt whatsoever, that she simply could not do it. That she had met someone else. That love was messy and real and inconvenient and she was sorry but not sorry enough to come back. Their mother had cried for exactly 40 minutes. Then she had dried her face, looked at Luna across the kitchen table, and said, "You will go instead." Luna had said nothing. That was the thing about her family. The silences she offered were always interpreted as agreement. So here she was. In a servant's room on the 4th floor of the Draven estate, ironing a sleeve that did not need ironing, preparing to attend a ceremony she had not been invited to represent a sister who had chosen freedom over obligation, and wearing a face she had practiced for years. The face that said she was fine. The face that said this was manageable. The face that asked for nothing. The room itself was clean but small. A single window faced north, which meant no direct sun, which meant the room held a particular kind of cold that no amount of heating quite fixed. The bed had 3 pillows, which felt like an excessive gesture for a space this size. Luna had arranged 2 of them against the wall and slept sitting up the first night because lying flat in an unfamiliar ceiling's dark felt too exposed. She had brought 1 suitcase. It had a broken wheel on the rear left corner. She had been meaning to fix it for 3 years. She dragged it without thinking about the wheel anymore. The sound it made, that small grinding scrape on every hard floor, had become background noise to her own life. The estate was extraordinary. She had known it would be, but knowing and seeing were entirely different things. The Draven estate sat on elevated land outside the city, surrounded by old trees that had been growing there longer than anyone currently alive could remember. The entrance gates were wrought iron, tall enough to feel like a statement. The main building was stone and glass in equal measure, the old world and the modern pressed together with an architect's careful confidence. Inside, everything was either warm wood or cool marble. Staff moved through the corridors with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned that invisibility was a professional skill. Luna understood invisibility. She had been practicing it her whole life. She finished ironing, hung the dress on the back of the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. She had 40 minutes before she needed to present herself to the household steward, a man named Colin who had met her at the gate with a clipboard and the expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head. He had checked her name against his list, found nothing, made a call on a small radio clip to his belt, received an answer she could not hear, and then led her to this room without further conversation. She did not know what the call had confirmed. She did not ask. Asking questions about her own presence felt like inviting an examination she might not pass. The estate had been given to the Draven family 4 generations back. She knew this because she had read everything available about the Draven line in the 3 days between Nadia's disappearance and her own arrival. Not because she was curious about them in the way a person might be curious about something that genuinely interested her, but because walking into an unfamiliar situation without information felt like driving with no headlights, and Luna had learned long ago that preparation was the only form of control available to people who had no other kind. The Alpha King's name was Kale Draven. He was 31. He had led his family's territory since he was 26, when his father had stepped down following an illness that the public statements referred to as fatigue and the private ones referred to as something more serious. Kale had not stumbled in the transition. He had moved into the position as if he had been rehearsing it privately for years, which, by all accounts, he had. There were photographs of him in the materials she had found. Professional ones, taken at formal events, the kind of photographs where the subject knows exactly where the camera is and composes themselves accordingly. In every one, he looked the same. Composed. Watchful. Present in the way that a person is present when they are holding something very still inside themselves. She had looked at those photographs for longer than she needed to and then closed the browser tab and gone to do something else. Nadia had been selected for the ceremony through a process that Luna still did not entirely understand. Something about tradition and compatibility, an old custom that had been adapted into a modern framework that sounded rational when explained and ancient when practiced. Their mother had been contacted 8 weeks ago. Nadia had been briefed. Preparations had been made. And then Nadia had dissolved all of it in a 2-minute phone call from a bus station, and Luna had been slotted into the space her sister had vacated, and here she was. She was not chosen. She was a replacement for someone who chose not to be chosen. The distinction felt important, though she was not sure who she was keeping it for. Dinner that first evening was in a long room with a table that seated 16 and currently seated 11. Luna was placed near the end, which she took as neither insult nor courtesy but simply arithmetic. The staff knew there was an extra person and they had put her somewhere. She sat, and she watched, and she ate the bread and the soup and the main course that followed without tasting much of any of it. Kale Draven sat at the head of the table. He arrived after everyone else was seated, which she recognized as either habit or intention, and he did not make an announcement of his arrival or wait for the room to acknowledge him. He simply sat. Said something quiet to the person on his left. Reached for his water glass. Luna watched him for approximately 30 seconds, which was long enough to confirm that he was exactly as composed in person as he appeared in photographs, and then she looked away because watching people without being noticed required the discipline of very short intervals. She knew this from a lifetime of practice. What she did not expect, and what she only understood later when she replayed the moment with the particular clarity that sleepless nights allow, was that in those 30 seconds he had also looked at her. Not with recognition. Not with curiosity. With the impersonal, comprehensive attention of a person assessing a room and cataloging its contents. She was part of the room. She was catalogued. And then his eyes moved on, and she was behind him in his attention, and she remained there for the rest of the meal. It was fine. It was exactly what she had expected. After dinner, she walked back to her room through a corridor that branched left past the main staircase. She passed a woman she had not seen at dinner, tall and carrying herself with the ease of someone who had been comfortable in this house for some time. The woman smiled at her. Luna smiled back. Neither of them spoke. In her room, she sat by the north-facing window in the dark and looked at the grounds below. There was a garden that was not visible from this angle, only the edge of it, one corner of a stone wall and what looked like the top of a hedge cut into a shape she could not quite identify. She looked at that hedge for a while without deciding what it was. On the windowsill, there was a bread roll she had taken from the dinner table. She had not planned to take it. Her hand had done it on its own, wrapped it in the cloth napkin, tucked it into her jacket pocket with the same unconscious efficiency with which she did most things that were about survival and not about want. She set it on the windowsill now and looked at it. She did not eat it. She was not hungry. She was something else. Something that did not have a clean name yet, that lived in the space between loneliness and its cousin, which was not quite the same thing but was close enough that distinguishing between them in the dark felt like unnecessary work. The ceremony was in 6 days. Kale's chosen companion for the ceremony, Seraphine, had been prepared for months. She moved through the estate already as if its rooms belonged to her, not in a forceful way but in the easy, unconscious way of someone who has been told the future and found it acceptable. She was warm, from what Luna could observe. She laughed easily and spoke to the staff by name and touched Kale's arm once at dinner with the practiced ease of a woman who had already decided this was hers. Luna watched all of it from a slight distance. She had memorized the exits from the main building by the end of the second day. Not because she planned to use them. Because knowing where the exits were had always been the first thing she did in any new place. It was not fear. It was preparation. There was a difference, even if from the outside they looked the same. She was not supposed to matter here. She was a placeholder, a name on a corrected clipboard, a quiet presence taking up a small room and a seat at the far end of a long table. She had been sent here to fulfill an obligation her family had committed to, and she would do that, and then she would go home, and her life would resume its reliable, manageable shape. She told herself this at the window, in the dark, with the bread roll sitting untouched on the sill. She almost believed it. What she did not tell herself, because some truths are too old and too tired to be spoken aloud even in private, was that she was used to this. Being the backup plan. Being the one sent when the preferred option was unavailable. Being present in spaces where no one had specifically wanted her there. She had built a life around that particular kind of presence, and she had made it work, and she had stopped grieving it years ago in the way you stop grieving the weather. You do not grieve the weather. You simply dress for it. The bread roll stayed on the windowsill all night. In the morning, the sun came from the south, and the room stayed cold, and Luna washed her face with the particular efficiency of someone who had stopped using mirrors for longer than necessary, and went downstairs for breakfast, and sat at the far end of the table, and did not take anything from the bread basket this time. 5 days until the ceremony. She straightened her napkin across her lap. She composed her face. She was fine. The ceremony began at dusk. They had been preparing for it since morning, the whole estate shifting into a different register, a kind of held bread that moved from room to room ahead of the actual event. Flowers arrived in bundles that required 3 staff members each to carry. Candles were set into holders along the main corridor, unlit but ready. The room where the ceremony would take place, a long hall on the ground floor with a stone floor and a ceiling so high it felt like weather, was closed off to everyone except the staff arranging it, and even they walked with a quiet that felt like reverence. Luna watched all of it from the edges. She had been given a dress by the household steward 2 days prior. Colin had appeared at her door with a garment bag over one arm and an expression that suggested the dress had been a logistical problem he had solved and did not wish to revisit. The dress was the color of deep water, a blue that was almost black in certain light, and it fit her well enough that she suspected someone had either guessed at her measurements or found them from a source she had not given permission to. She wore it without asking which. She stood at the back of the room when the ceremony began because there was no assigned place for her, which meant she assigned herself to the wall and the wall accepted her without comment. The hall filled. People arrived in arrangements of clothing that communicated their significance clearly without stating it. The higher the status, the more they assumed the room would come to them. Luna watched the room come to them. She watched Seraphine enter in white, and she watched the particular quality of attention that followed Seraphine across the floor, and she understood it without bitterness. Seraphine was beautiful in the way that certain people are beautiful, which is to say that the beauty was not the most interesting thing about her, but it arrived first and made space for everything else. Cale entered last. He wore dark clothing and he moved through the room with the ease of someone who had stopped needing to prove anything. People shifted. Conversations ended. Eyes followed. He did not acknowledge any of it, not from cold indifference but from the same composure she had noticed at the dinner table, that sense of something very still being held very carefully inside a person. He crossed to the front of the room where the elder stood, and Seraphine stepped forward, and the old words began. Luna stood at the back with her hands at her sides. The elder's voice was low and even, shaped for this specific room and this specific purpose. The words were formal, traditional, the kind of language that had been used in this ceremony for generations and had worn smooth at its edges from use. Luna understood the structure of it. She had read about it. She had prepared herself for witnessing it. She had not prepared for what happened next. Cale stepped forward to complete the ceremony. And stopped. Not a theatrical pause. Not a hesitation for effect. Something involuntary moved through him, visible in his shoulders first and then in the angle of his head, and he turned. Not toward Seraphine. Away from her. A quarter turn, no more, and his eyes moved through the room with that same comprehensive attention she had witnessed at the dinner table, that cataloging focus, except this time it did not feel impersonal. It found her. Luna held herself very still. His gaze stayed on her for a moment that had no polite measurement. Not long enough to be a sin. long enough that she counted her own heartbeat without meaning to. Then he turned back. He completed the ceremony. He placed the mark on Seraphine's wrist with a steady hand and a steady face, and the room exhaled as one, and applause moved through the gathered people in a warm, certain wave. Luna did not move from the wall. She watched Seraphine's face change, that small, private bloom of relief and joy that a person cannot entirely conceal when the thing they have been hoping for arrives. She watched the elder close his book. She watched the staff begin to move with the quiet efficiency of a production entering its next phase. She watched Kale lead Seraphine forward through the applause. And then, because she could not help it, because the pull of it was stronger than her discipline in that particular moment, she looked at him one final time. He was already looking back. His eyes found hers across the room with a precision that felt impossible to explain. And Luna held the look. She did not flinch from it. She did not smile or soften or offer anything that could be mistaken for an invitation. She simply held it, for one full breath, with everything she actually felt compressed into the very small, very hard space behind her sternum, and then she let it go. She released him from her attention the way you release something you have decided not to keep. She walked to the corridor before the applause finished. The corridor was stone and candlelight, the unlit candles throwing no light at all, and her shoes made a sound on the floor that she focused on because focusing on the sound of her shoes was manageable. She counted. 1, 2, 3. She counted because the alternative was something else, something that lived below the counting, and she was not ready for it. She reached 43 steps before the door. She pushed through it. She walked 6 steps past it into the cool evening air outside, into the space between the building and the garden wall where no one was standing, where the sounds of the ceremony inside were still audible but softened by stone and distance, and she stopped. She looked at the dark garden and the dark sky above it, and the thing below the counting rose up through her, and she let it, because there was no one to watch her let it, and the pretense of composure requires an audience to justify its cost. She stood there for a while. And then she said it. Not loudly. Not with any particular drama. In the plain, matter-of-fact voice of a woman who has stopped performing for anyone, including herself. 7 words, spoken to the air and the stone wall and the garden and whatever else was present in the dark. She said them once. She did not repeat them. She straightened her posture, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and walked back inside to collect her jacket and begin working out what time the first car could take her to the train station in the morning. She did not see Kale standing in the shadow of the doorway behind her, 6 feet away, where he had followed her out without intending to and stopped when she started speaking. She did not see what crossed his face when he heard those 7 words. She did not see him stand there long after she had gone back inside, his hand resting on the stone doorframe, his eyes on the dark garden, something in his expression that the ceremony hall had not produced and would not have recognized. The last thing she thought before she fell asleep that night was that it was over. She was wrong about that. She was wrong in a way that would take time to understand. But for now, she slept, and the bread roll sat on the windowsill, and the night was cold, and somewhere on a corridor below her, Seraphine was being congratulated, and Kale Draven was not with her. He was still standing at the door. He was still thinking about 7 words spoken to no one. They would not stop. The paperwork arrived at 8 in the morning. Colin slid it under Luna's door in a manila envelope with her name written on the front in careful handwriting that was not his. She found it when she stepped on it getting out of bed, looked down at it for a moment, and then picked it up and read it sitting on the edge of the mattress in the cold room with the north-facing window. It was a release notice. Administrative language, careful and without warmth. Her presence at the estate was no longer required. A car would be made available at 10. She was thanked for her time in the way that official documents thank people for things, which is to say without specificity. The signature at the bottom belonged to someone in an administrative office whose name she did not recognize. Luna read it twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and put it back in the envelope. She had known this was coming. She had packed most of her things before sleeping because she had learned, through years of being in temporary places, that leaving without warning was easier when you were already half gone. She pulled the suitcase out from under the bed, added the dress from the hook on the door, added the small toiletry bag from the bathroom shelf, and zipped it closed. The broken wheel caught on the edge of the bathroom threshold as she dragged it out. The same small grind as always. She did not look down at it. On the windowsill, the bread roll was still there. She had looked at it every morning and every night and had not eaten it. She stood now with the suitcase handle in her hand and looked at it one more time. It was dry now. Past the point of being food. She had kept it past the point of usefulness for reasons she had not examined. She left it. She did not look at it again as she left the room. Downstairs, Colin met her with the expression of a man completing a task he was glad to have nearly finished. He handed her a second envelope, thicker than the first, which turned out to contain her train ticket and a small amount of cash for travel expenses. She put it in her jacket pocket without counting it. She thanked Colin. He nodded and gestured toward a car waiting on the front drive. The car was black and clean and driven by a man named Peter who introduced himself when she got in and then did not speak again, which suited her entirely. She put the suitcase in the boot herself because she had reached a point of independence in her daily life where accepting help with physical tasks felt like ceding something she needed to keep. Peter watched her do it without offering twice. They pulled out of the gate at 10:10. The mountain road that led down from the estate curved back on itself 3 times before it straightened out toward the lower valley. Luna watched the estate disappear behind her in the rear window, stone and glass and old trees, a place that had nothing to do with her despite having been her home for 6 days. She turned forward. She did not look back again. She was 22 minutes down the road when Peter braked. Not a sharp brake. A controlled, gradual slowing, the kind a professional driver produces when they have seen something ahead in time to manage it properly. Luna looked up from her jacket pocket where she had been turning her phone over in her hands without unlocking it. There was a car stopped in the middle of the road. It was a car she recognized. Dark, large, the same model she had seen at the estate. It was parked at an angle across the lane with its driver's door already open and a man standing in the road beside it. Cale Draven stood in the road in the same dark clothing from the ceremony the night before, looking as if he had not slept, which he had not, and looking as if he had parked in the middle of a mountain road without considerable advance planning, which was also true. Peter stopped the car. Luna sat in the back seat and looked at Cale through the windshield. He looked back at her. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Luna opened her door and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder because sitting in a car waiting to see what a person in the road does next was not something she could manage from a seated position. She stood. The morning air was cold and sharp. The mountain on one side, the valley dropping away on the other. 12 feet of empty road between them. His face was difficult to read in the honest morning light. She had only seen him in the controlled environment of the estate, in rooms that had been arranged for impression. Out here, on a road, unannounced, he looked like a man who had done something impulsive and had not yet determined whether it was the right thing. She waited. He said, "What did you say last night?" She looked at him. "Outside," he added. "After the ceremony." What were the words? The mountain held its position. The valley held its position. Peter sat in the car with the discretion of a professional who had seen things he had not been paid to understand. Luna said, "Why does it matter?" Cale said nothing. That was what surprised her. She had expected an answer. An explanation. A reason she could evaluate and respond to. He offered none. He stood in the road 12 feet away with the question gone from the air between them and no answer to replace it, and his silence was not avoidance. It was honest. He did not know why it mattered. He only knew that it did, in the persistent, unignorable way that certain things matter, that sit in the mind and will not be moved by reasoning. She looked at him for a long time. She was measuring something, though she would not have been able to say what precisely. He did not feel the silence. He did not try to persuade her. He simply stood there, in the cold mountain morning, waiting. She looked down. Her suitcase was in the boot of Peter's car, and the broken wheel was on it, and she had been dragging that broken wheel across floors for 3 years, and she was looking at the gravel road and thinking about that in the way you think about small things when a large thing is happening right in front of you and your mind needs a moment to process it sideways. She looked up. "It does not matter," she said. "Not today." He opened his mouth. She held up one hand, not forcefully, just with the flat certainty of a woman who had decided where the boundary was. "You made your choice," she said. "The ceremony is done. You placed the mark on someone else and that is the end of it." She said it without cruelty. She said it as a fact. "I am going home." He said, "I know." She waited. "I am not asking you to stay," he said. She had not expected that. She recalibrated. "Then what are you asking?" He looked at her. That same quality of attention from the dinner table, from the ceremony hall, from the doorway the night before that she had not known about. Comprehensive. Honest. Holding something very still. "I am asking what you said," he said quietly. "Just that." She stood on the gravel road in the cold morning and she thought about those 7 words. She thought about the stone wall and the dark garden and the voice she had used, which was the voice she used when no one was listening. The plain voice. The tired voice. The voice that had run out of the energy required to be anything other than exact. She was not ready to give them to him. Not here, not on a mountain road, not in the strange and suspended moment of a man who had just committed to someone else standing in traffic to ask her what she had said when she thought no one was listening. "I will not tell you today," she said. He nodded. As if this was an answer. As if this was enough. She got back in the car. Peter started the engine. She did not look out the rear window this time. She looked straight ahead and she kept her hand still in her lap and she listened to the sound of the road beneath the car, the sound of distance building. Behind her, Kel stood in the road until the car disappeared around the first bend. Then he got back in his own car and sat there without starting the engine for a very long time. His hands were in his lap too. He did not know what to do with them. He had not felt that since he was a child. He sat on a mountain road in a territory he administered, in a life he had managed with precision and discipline for 5 years, and he felt something he had no protocol for, which was the specific discomfort of a person who has been in charge of things for so long they have forgotten what genuine uncertainty feels like. 12 minutes later, he started the car. He turned it around. He drove back up the mountain toward the estate and the person who was waiting in it who had done nothing wrong, and he drove with the particular quiet of someone who has understood something they wish they had understood differently. He was already thinking about what came next. He did not know yet what that would cost. 3 weeks and 2 days after the ceremony, Kel Draven dissolved the arrangement. There was no single event that produced the decision, no moment that could be pointed to later as the cause. What there was instead was an accumulation. 17 days of waking up with the 7 words he had not had in his head, because the mind supplies what it does not have when it wants something badly enough, and his mind kept supplying guesses. 17 days of a mark on Seraphine's wrist that sat on her skin with the faint wrongness of a word used in the wrong context, technically placed but somehow off, both of them feeling it and neither of them saying so. 17 days of conversations that moved on the surface of things without disturbing anything underneath. On the 18th day, he sat in his office after dinner and he acknowledged to himself, with the same directness he tried to apply to everything, that he had made an error. Not about Seraphine as a person. She was exactly who she had appeared to be. She was warm and intelligent and had been prepared for this role with genuine seriousness, and she deserved someone who had made the choice from the right starting point, which he had not. He had made it from the starting point of a man who had a ceremony to complete and a tradition to uphold and no particular reason to believe that anything was wrong. And then a woman had walked out of that ceremony and spoken 7 words to a garden wall, and he had pressed himself against a doorframe in the dark to listen, and everything had shifted in a way that he had spent 18 days trying to shift back. He could not shift it back. He called his family's legal counsel at 9 that evening. The dissolution took 4 weeks. 11 people, 4 different legal teams, several conversations that required a level of patience he had to concentrate to maintain. Seraphine handled it with more dignity than he had earned from her, which he understood was a reflection of her character rather than any mitigation of his responsibility. He told her as directly as he could what had happened. Not the details. The essential fact, that he had entered the ceremony without being fully certain, and that he had learned what certainty actually felt like too late, and that remaining was not something he could do honestly. She had looked at him for a long time. Then she had said, "I felt it too." From the beginning. He had no answer for that. He held it instead, as something that deserved to be held. By the time the dissolution was complete, he knew where Luna was. Not because he had been tracking her, but because knowing where the people who mattered to him were was something his attention did automatically, a habit of care that he had never examined until now. She was in her home city. A fourth-floor apartment in a building that had good bones and a landlord who kept the common areas clean but could not be persuaded to replace the elevator that had been out of service for 6 months. She worked for an architectural firm as an administrative coordinator. She was, by all available evidence, good at this job. Her supervisor had given her a strong written reference when they thought she was considering another position, which she had not been. She had sent the inquiry as a way of maintaining her value in a market she did not entirely trust, and the reference had arrived and made her feel something she was not used to feeling, which was seen. She was fine. Cale drove to her city on a Tuesday. He did not announce himself. He had thought about sending a message and decided against it because a message allowed for a refusal that a presence at a door did not, and he was aware that this was not entirely fair, but he was going anyway. He parked in the street below her building. He walked up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was out. He stood outside apartment 14 and knocked. The pause before she opened the door was exactly long enough for a person who has looked through a peephole and needed a moment to decide. She opened it. She was in the clothes of a person at home on a Tuesday evening, which is to say practical and comfortable and entirely without performance. Her hair was down. She was not wearing shoes. She looked at him with the expression he now recognized as her default, which was not exactly neutral but was so well managed that neutrality was the best approximate word for it. "You dissolved it," she said. Not a question. "Yes." She stepped back from the door. He understood this as an invitation and walked inside. The apartment was exactly what its layout suggested from the outside. Not large but organized with care, every object in a location that made sense. Books in the built-in shelves beside the window, arranged by size rather than subject, which he found unexpectedly interesting. A small table near the kitchen with 2 chairs, one pushed in and one at an angle, the angled one suggesting she had been sitting there recently. A kitchen that was actively in use, something on the stove, a smell of something that had been cooking a little too long. She went back to the stove. She picked up a spoon and began stirring the pot. "You should sit down," she said. He sat at the table in the chair that was already at an angle. He watched her stir the pot for a moment. It was already done, clearly. She stirred it anyway with the focused attention of someone giving their hands something to do so that the rest of them could manage what was happening. "I know why you dissolved it," she said, not looking at him. He waited. She said, "You heard me." "Yes." Her hand kept moving. The spoon went in slow circles. "How much did you hear?" "7 words," he said. She set the spoon down on the rest beside the stove. She did not turn around immediately. She looked at the wall above the pot for a moment, at some point in the middle distance that was not the wall but was near it. Then she turned. She looked at him across the small apartment, across the table and the 2 chairs and the space between them that had been various sizes over the past weeks and was now the width of a kitchen. She said the words. Not in the way she had said them the first time. That version had been spoken to darkness and stone and the particular honesty of a person who has stopped pretending for the night. This version was spoken in evening light, in her own home, to a man who had parked 4 floors below and climbed the stairs and knocked on her door, and it carried all of that in it. "I deserve to be chosen too." 7 words. Plain and level and without apology. The room was quiet for a moment. What moved across Cale's face was not guilt, though guilt was probably present somewhere beneath it. What moved across his face was recognition. The specific, struck look of a person who has heard something they already knew and has been waiting to have it confirmed from outside themselves. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You are right." She looked at him. "You deserved it from the beginning," he said. "And I saw that. I saw you at that dinner table, and I saw you in that ceremony room, and I saw what you were doing, which was being entirely present in a place that had given you no reason to be, and I registered all of it, and I went ahead with what I had already committed to and I should not have." She did not respond immediately. He said, "I am not asking you to accept that as enough." "Good," she said. "Because it is not enough." He nodded. She turned back to the stove. She picked up the spoon. She stirred the pot again, which was well past done, which neither of them mentioned. "Why are you here?" she said. "Because I wanted you to know I heard you," he said. "And because I have been doing something wrong for a long time and I needed to stop doing it." She said, "What were you doing wrong?" "Treating certainty as something I could decide to have," he said. "I was certain about the ceremony because I needed to be certain. That is not the same thing as actually being certain." She turned the heat off under the pot. She left the spoon in it. She pulled out the chair on the other side of the table and sat down across from him. They were now separated by a table that was approximately 3 feet wide. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the kitchen was quiet except for the particular silence that forms when two people have run out of the things they prepared to say and have arrived at what was actually true. "I am not a replacement," she said. "No," he said. "If you are here because I was there first, or because my sister left and I filled the space, or because I said something you were not supposed to hear, then you are here for the wrong reason. I am here," he said, "because you are the only person I have been unable to stop thinking about in 5 years." She held his gaze. The pot cooled on the stove. She did not ask him to leave. He did not ask to stay. They sat across from each other in a quiet kitchen that smelled of food cooked past its best, and the silence between them was the first silence either of them had shared that did not need anything done to it. Outside, the elevator was still broken. Neither of them noticed. The second ceremony happened on a morning in late autumn, in a room that bore no resemblance to the first one. No assembled crowd. No arrangements made for impression. A small room on the upper floor of the Draven estate that had been used for family meetings and private decisions for 3 generations. Stone walls, 2 tall windows, a wooden floor that had been walked over enough times to hold a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. An elder brought in at Kale's specific insistence, an older man named Gerald who had conducted ceremonies in his career and had opinions about the reduction in formal protocol that he expressed once and then set aside when he understood the situation. Luna stood near the window. She was wearing clothes she had chosen herself, which was a sentence that would have been unremarkable about anyone else and was, for her, the whole point. A dress the color of pale morning sky, simple in its construction, chosen 3 days earlier in a shop in the city where she had stood in a fitting room and looked at herself in a mirror and decided, for the first time in a long time, that she liked what she saw. Not because of how she looked. Because of how she felt in what she was wearing. There was a difference. Kale stood near the center of the room. He had been there when she arrived, which she had noted. He was not positioned for maximum impression or maximum authority. He was simply standing near the center of a small room, waiting for her, and when she came in he looked at her with an expression that she had now seen enough times to read with some confidence. It was the expression of a man who was paying close attention and had no intention of pretending otherwise. Gerald stood near the door with his book and the patient manner of a professional who had learned that ceremony was mostly about the people in the room and very little about what he contributed to it. There was no audience. There was no applause waiting to happen. There was only the room and the morning light and 3 people and the particular weight of something that had been a long time arriving. Gerald began the words. Luna had heard them before, in a larger room with a crowd filling every seat, and they had moved past her then in the way that words move past a person who is not their subject. Now they arrived differently. Not because they were different words. Because she was standing in a different relation to them. When Gerald reached the question, He paused in the way tradition required. Cale opened his mouth. Luna spoke first. Yes. One word. Certain. Arriving before it was asked for, which was not the traditional order, which Gerald acknowledged with a small adjustment of expression and then continued without comment. Cale said, yes. His voice in the small room was very quiet and entirely without performance. Gerald completed the words. He reached forward and completed the act of the ceremony, the placing of the mark, and it settled on her wrist with an immediate, certain quality that she felt rather than saw, a warmth that was not hit exactly but was near it, something that suggested rightness in the way that a note played in the correct key suggests it, not by explaining itself but by simply sounding true. She looked at her wrist. She looked at what was there. Cale watched her look at it. The room was very quiet. Gerald closed his book. He looked between them with the expression of a man who had been brought to do a job and had done it and had also witnessed something he had not expected, which was two people standing in a small room being extraordinarily honest with each other without making a scene of it. He had conducted many ceremonies in various capacities. He had seen people cry and people laugh and people look at each other with the sweeping feeling of a moment they had planned and prepared for. He had not often seen this. This still quality. This held thing between two people who had earned their way to the same room through effort and time and the slow work of telling the truth. He left quietly, which he had been asked to do. The room was just the two of them. Luna looked at Cale. He looked at her. She said, "It took longer than it should have." He said, "Yes. It did." He did not apologize again. She did not ask him to. The apologies had happened in the weeks between the mountain road and the kitchen table and the slow, careful work of two people establishing what was true between them. They had happened in conversations that were sometimes difficult and sometimes quiet and sometimes both at once, and they had been received without performance and without the pretense of easy forgiveness. What was left now was not the apology. What was left was what came after. She looked at her wrist again. "The mark is permanent," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know what that means." "I know you do." She looked up at him. She thought about all the things she could say. The careful things, the protected things, the things she had learned to say in situations where she was uncertain of the ground beneath her. She had spent a long time being uncertain of the ground beneath her. She had spent a long time dressing for whether she could not control and making her peace with that arrangement. She thought about the bread roll on the windowsill. She thought about the broken wheel. She thought about the corridor and the stone wall and the 7 words and the garden that had been dark and the voice she had used, the plain voice, the tired voice, the voice that had run out of the energy to pretend. She thought about the woman who had said those words to nobody. She thought about what it felt like to have somebody hear them. She said, "I will not be managed." "No," he said. "I will not be placed at the end of a table and told that is the appropriate position. No. I will not be what is convenient. I will not be agreeable when I disagree. I will not make myself smaller because the room does not know what to do with my actual size." He said, "I would not ask you to." She looked at him for a long moment. Measuring. She had been measuring him for months now, taking regular readings, comparing them against what he had done and what he had said and how the two aligned. They aligned. Not perfectly. He was still learning. So was she. But they aligned in the way that matters, which is honestly, which is without the performance of alignment covering a different truth beneath. She said, "Then we can continue." He nodded. Neither of them moved toward the other with any grand gesture. Neither of them filled the moment with noise or display it did not need. They stood in a small room in morning light with a ceremony completed and a future that was now a shared thing, and the quiet between them was not empty. It was full. It was the particular fullness of two people who had said the true things and were now in the same room on the other side of that. Later that afternoon, he carried her suitcase in from the car. He had gone out to help with the bags, which there were several of, and when he lifted the suitcase he noticed the wheel immediately. The rear left, the one that had been broken, the one that had been making that small grinding sound on every hard floor she had walked across for 3 years. Except it was not broken. It was new. He looked at it. He turned the case slightly on the gravel drive. New wheel, installed cleanly, matching the others. He looked up at her. She was watching him notice it. She did not say anything. He carried the case inside without mentioning it. But he set it down more carefully than he had intended to, and later she found it standing upright against the wall of the room that was now hers, all 4 wheels on the floor, nothing grinding against any threshold. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. 3 years she had carried that case with the broken wheel. She had fixed it herself, 3 months ago, standing in her apartment hallway on a Saturday morning with a replacement part she had ordered and a small wrench from the tool drawer. It had taken 20 minutes. She had wondered, afterward, why she had waited so long. She thought she knew the answer now. Some things wait until you are ready to believe they are worth fixing. She crossed the room and set the suitcase against the wall under the window. This window faced south. In the morning, the light would come directly through it. She stood and looked at the light it would bring. That was not yet there, that was hours away, but already as certain as anything she had let herself believe in, and she did not say anything to the room or the window or the morning that was coming. She did not need to. She had already said the thing that mattered, 7 words in a dark garden to no one at all, and it had been enough. It had been, in the end, everything.